Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of Reading Buddy Book Club for June. We are reading Malamander by Thomas Taylor. My name is Miss Emily, and I am an assistant youth and teen librarian here at Fayetteville Public Library. And we are so excited to be having the Reading Buddy Book Club again this year. I hope you guys are enjoying it so far. Our last episode was pretty exciting. We got some interesting stuff happening. We met some new characters, we unraveled a little bit more of the mystery, and we even caught a glimpse of the Malamander. Before we start reading, make sure that you have your reading buddy. If you haven't already, go ahead and keep working on your crafts and your coloring pages, or if you would rather, just follow along with me while I read. Let's get going. Chapter 13. Mrs. Fossil's Bucket. It's the next day, and a frosty sun is climbing above the horizon. When I get up, Violet is already awake and staring out of the cellar window at the ankles of the people passing by. Upstairs in the hotel is the suitcase clatter of guests in reception. "Did you sleep well?" I ask. Violet has built some kind of nest for herself, behind the coat racks where a hot water pipe runs along the wall. She was already asleep down there when I got back the evening before, and this is the first time I've seen her since. Yes, after reading for a bit. "I don't suppose you stole any more pastries from the kitchen," I say. Violet shakes her head. "You told me not to, remember?" "I get a plate of stale ones every morning," I explain. "Chef used to save me freshly baked, but, well, Mr. Mollusk put a stop to that when he found out. I'll bring it down here and we can chew over what to do next. Oh, and I found something out." When I get back with the rubbery croissants, Violet is sitting in the armchair, the still damp contents of Mrs. Fossil's bucket spread out on a suitcase in front of her. "Herbie, can you remember where Mrs. Fossil was hurt?" "Under the pier," I say. "No," Violet rolls her eyes. "I mean, where on her body? It looks like her hand and her arm. Is that right?" "I think so." I sit on the floor beside the suitcase. "Are you thinking that maybe one of these things might have hurt her when she picked it up?" There are dozens of objects. One is a silver fork, corrosion-eaten and strange-looking after years in the sea, but not sharp. "I don't think any of these things could have drawn blood," Violet says, pushing them around with her finger. "It's just funny pebbles, weirdly shaped driftwood, shells, and bits. And I think this is an ammonite." "What's that, though?" I say, pointing at an oddly translucent red stone, about the size and shape of a very large egg. Violet picks it up and walks over to the window. She holds the stone up. It gathers up the morning light and seems to hold it inside itself, glowing in Violet's palm like a small red sun. "Whoa," I say. "It's pretty," Violet replies, tossing the stone in her hand, "but hardly dangerous. I think it's a big lump of sea glass, that's all." "Nice bit, though," I say. "Mrs. F has loads of that stuff in her shop. She'll want it back, I expect. I'll take it around later." "Let's both go," said Violet, sweeping the things back into the bucket. "I want to see how she is, anyway, and I need to find out more about what we saw yesterday on the beach." Mrs. Fossil's Flots Emporium is in a different part of town from the Erie Book Dispensary, but the twisting, narrow lanes and tall seaside houses look the same. The ground floor is mostly an enormous bay window, filled with jars and bottles. In the glass of the peeling shop door, the word "closed" is displayed, painted on a piece of driftwood. I knock anyway. After a moment, the doors open, and the person who looks out isn't Mrs. Fossil. "Dr. Thelassie," I say. "We've come to see your patient." "I cannot advise it," says the man, his dark brows lowering over his Julius Caesar nose. "Mrs. Fossil has had a nasty shock. She needs to rest." "Is that Herbert Lemon?" comes Mrs. F's voice, a bit wobbly, from somewhere deep inside the shop. "And his friend Violet? Oh, please let them in, Doc. They were on the beach with me yesterday." We enter, and I hear Violet gasp as she takes in the extraordinary interior of the Flux Emporium. The bottles and jars in the window, backlit now by the morning sun, burn and sparkle with translucent pebbles of every imaginable color. Violet looks down and sees her own body dappled with rainbow light. "Sea glass," says Mrs. F., also noticing Violet's wondering expression. "Mermaid's tears, broken bottle bits, thrown away as rubbish, rolled by the sea for countless tides. Turned to jewels by the power of nature." Mrs. Fossil is sitting in a rickety folding beach chair, surrounded by teetering mountains of beachcomber finds. There are more glass jars of minerals, tide-rolled pieces of china, shells of every possible shape and pattern. There are petrified dinosaur bones piled up next to lost frogman slippers, fishermen's floats, and children's plastic toys by the basket. Nets hang down from the ceiling like the webs of giant sea spiders, and over everything floats the scent of tea and toast, and the mysterious faraway tang of the ocean. "Come in," Mrs. Fossil waves us over. "I would boil a kettle, but—" and she indicates her right hand. Mrs. Fossil's arm is laid out on a makeshift table made from half a surfboard and a plastic drum. Her sleeve is rolled back to reveal, across her hand and wrist, a curve of angry red wounds. "That must really hurt," says Violet. "It's just a bit numb today," says Mrs. F., though one look at her pained expression suggests that it actually hurts a great deal. "And I can already move my fingers again. Doc says I'll be right as rain in a jiffy." "If by jiffy you mean a week, then maybe," says Dr. Thelassie. "You are lucky I did not have to call an ambulance today." "What did this, Doc?" I say, pointing at the horrible wounds. Dr. Thelassie waggled his great black eyebrows until the specks on his forehead fall down onto his beaky nose. He leans over Mrs. F.'s arm. "When I first saw this, I thought it was a jellyfish sting. See how the red marks are strung out in a line? But closer inspection reveals puncture marks. There's no doubt this is a bite, the bite of a large, venomous creature." "I didn't know we had creatures like that here," I say, glancing at Violet. "We don't," says the doctor, pushing his glasses back up on his forehead. "But we do in stories," says Mrs. Fossil in a quiet voice. "We have the Malamander." "What did you see, Mrs. Fossil?" asks Violet. "When this happened, can you remember?" Mrs. Fossil goes pale, or paler than she already is. "Teeth," she whispers, "teeth like needles. It came out of a rock pool beside me as I was admiring something I'd found. I had no time to react." "You mustn't get agitated," says the doctor, beginning to bind her arm. "It only accelerates the poison around your system. Please try to relax." "We found your bucket," Violet tells her, holding it up. "I tried to pick up everything that had fallen out." "Thank you, my dear." "I wonder," says Violet, tipping the contents onto the surfboard, "which of these things were you holding in your hand when that, whatever it was, bit you?" "Well, do you know, I think it was a nice piece of red." Mrs. Fossil nods toward the fiery stone we were admiring earlier. "The sea glass. It's quite a beauty, isn't it? A rare color." Dr. Thelassie finishes binding up Mrs. F.'s hand and wrist, and he snaps his medicinal bag shut. "Oh, thank you, Doc," says Mrs. Fossil. "I don't know what I'd have done without you. Why don't you help yourself to something for your museum? A little thank you gift from my beachcombing treasures. I found some lovely corporalites yesterday. I know how much you like your dino poo." "Museum?" asks Violet. "I am, in fact, not only a medical doctor," says Dr. Thelassie. "I am also a doctor of natural history. I curate the local museum here in Erie-on-Sea." "Herbie, haven't you taken your friend to see it yet?" Mrs. Fossil says. "The museum is one of the sights." As the doctor heads for the door, He stops and turns. Are you serious about making a contribution to the museum? He asks Mrs. Fossil. Of course! Without you, I'd be languishing in a hospital bed somewhere, pumped full of goodness knows what. Help yourself. Then I select this, the doctor says. He returns to the surfboard table and picks up a large piece of red sea glass. He holds it up to the light to get a closer look, and ruby light seems to shine out of it, tinting his olive skin with a strange glow. Really? Mrs. Fossil looks confused. Wouldn't you prefer something ancient? I have an iguanodon thumb spike over there that's much better than the one you have on display in the museum. Wouldn't you rather have that? It's kind of you, but I have set my heart on this trinket, says Dr. Thelassie, slipping the red stone into his jacket pocket. And now, I really would urge you to rest, Mrs. Fossil. I will return tomorrow to change your bandages. And with that, he opens the door of the shop and leaves. Chapter 14. What a Beachcomber Knows. So, do you really think you were attacked by the Malamander, Mrs. F? I say, settling down on an upturned fishing crate beside her. Oh, Herbie, I really don't know, says Mrs. Fossil, wincing as she tries to move her bandaged arm. I always said I believed those old stories, but honestly, I was just saying that to amuse people. You know, the tourists we get in the summer. This is our Loch Ness Monster, after all. They come in the shop and ask if I've seen anything. So, of course, I tell them yes. Glimpses in the sea mist, that sort of thing. It makes them more inclined to buy something. I've never actually took the legend that seriously, but now... What is the Malamander legend exactly? Says Violet. I mean, the one everyone knows. The one the tourists ask you about. Oh, there are lots of different stories about it. Going way back, says Mrs. F. It's a monstrous creature, half man, half fish, half goodness knows what, that has haunted these misty shores since before ever a town was built on Erie Rock. They say it can sometimes be glimpsed as midwinter approaches, as it searches for somewhere to lay its magical egg. Magical egg, says Violet. What kind of magical egg? Oh, the grants you your dearest wish kind. Mrs. F chuckles with a return to her usual cheerfulness. The whole make your dreams come true shebang. But of course, you only get that if you can take the egg. And to take the egg, you have to defeat the Malamander. Which no one can do, I throw in, remembering the first time I heard the tales too. On account of its hideous spikes and steely scales and it being, a monster. So what happens to it then? The egg? The creature devours it, says Mrs. Fossil. As the sun rises the next day, when its mate never comes, it eats that egg up and slinks back into the depths for another year. But if people tried to take it, says Violet after a thoughtful pause. I mean, in the stories, have people tried to steal this amazing wishing egg? Oh, endlessly, Mrs. Fossil chuckles again. Heroes galore in the legends. Every single one of them. She rolls her eyes and waggles the fingers of her good hand in a way she probably thinks is spooky. Gobbled up by the beastie. Violet doesn't smile. Anyway, Miss Fossil continues, the tourists love it. Gives them something to look out for when the mists come in and they try a bit of beachcombing for themselves. Everyone loves a good story. But you've never actually seen anything yourself, asks Violet, before yesterday? Oh, I wouldn't go that far. You don't spend hours on the foreshore in all weathers without having strange experiences, or hearing strange sounds. Those mists in particular can addle your senses, make close things seem far away, and far away things seem close enough to nearly bite your hand off, I say, finishing the sentence for her. Mrs. F grimaces and begins to look exhausted. I really don't know what I saw, my dears, And that's the truth of it. There could be a plain and everyday example for it all, I suppose, says Violet, but she doesn't sound too sure. She glances again at the door through which Dr. Thelassie had just left. Is sea glass valuable? She adds, turning back to Mrs. F. I mean, more valuable than a genuine dinosaur bone? Oh, don't mind Dr. Thelassie, says Mrs. Fossil, managing a weak smile. He'd never admit it, but his museum and my shop are more or less the same thing. He'll have that old lump of red glass on a pedestal by the end of the day, with a fancy label on it, no doubt. You should go along there and see for yourself. We leave Mrs. Fossil to her shop and her bandages and head back out into the narrow street. It's midday and almost sunny, but there's still a hard nip in the air. And I want to go back to my cubbyhole, but Violet isn't having any of it. I won't find my answers there, she says. I think we need to go back to the beach. You're not scared, I say, after yesterday? There's no mist today, says Violet. Why, are you scared? Of course not, straightened my cap nervously. Not a bit. Then let's go down there, says Violet, pulling her coat close around her and leading the way. I was surprised you asked so many questions about the legend, I say, running to keep up. Back in Mrs. Fossil's shop. I thought you were reading about it in the book the mermonkey gave you. Herbie, says Vi, coming to a halt. Have you ever read that book? I say, fiddling with my buttons. Not in so many words. So you haven't read the description of the magical egg? Asks Violet. The Malamander egg that can grant wishes. So you don't actually know what it looks like? Says Violet. Does it? I squint, scratching my head beneath my cap. Does it look like an egg? Violet is unimpressed. She turns and marches off toward the beach, with me flapping along behind. We come out through an old stone archway onto the seawall, which in this part of town is actually fortified ramparts. Ahead of us, the beach stretches away for miles, the tide low and the sea only a distant murmur. Directly below us are the spindly fishermen's sheds, painted black with seagull-dropping roofs. Reaching up between them are the spikes of stone that jut from the sand like giant teeth, giving them their name, Maw Rocks. Violet leans out over the wall and takes a deep breath of freezing sea air. Then she turns to me. It's not just an egg, Herbie, like the kind you can make an omelet with. The Malamander egg is described in the book as being a wondrous ruby red, Herbie, with a glow inside like fire. A red glowing egg made of something like crystal. You mean, I say, like the thing Mrs. Fossil was picking up when she was attacked? Exactly, says Violet, like the thing your Dr. Thelassie has just taken away in his pocket. Chapter 15. Boat hooks. The steps down to the beach from the ramparts are narrow and sea-smashed, giving way to raw rock in places. The lower ones are almost completely covered in seaweed, but we manage to get down in one piece. What are these? Asks Violet, pointing to the towering black sheds. Fishermen's huts, I say. Most of them haven't been used for years, but some of the fishermen keep their tackle here. Between two of the huts, each several stories tall, an old rope fishing net has been hung, like a cobweb set to catch seagulls. That's how they dry them, I explained. The nets, I mean. Hey, Violet. I pick up the pace because Violet has turned a corner, ducked beneath the net, and vanished. When I catch up to her, she's trying one of the shed doors. You can't just go in there, I say. These fishermen are hard men, sea-hardened, you know. You don't want them catching you messing with their stuff. There's no one here now, though, is there? She replies, pulling the door open with a creak. I'm just taking a look. I follow her inside. Well, I have to, don't I? It's dark in the shed, but in the small light that creeps in, I see a ladder bolted to the inside of the wall. and I watch Violet's feet as she disappears up it. I thought you wanted to go down the beach, I whisper hiss up the ladder as I follow. What are we doing in here? I want to see the view, comes the reply. We reach the top story, which is black and airless and smells like fish guts. The only light comes from the edges of the tall hatch in the wall. Violet fiddles with the catch and then shoves it open. The rush of fresh air that floods in is a relief. The beach is laid out before us, with the pier and the far sea directly ahead. You'd get a better view from the seawall, I say. I know, says Violet, leaning out of the hatch and looking each way. But on the seawall, everyone can see me. Here is more private. What is it you want to do? I say. Isn't it obvious? Says Violet. Something is happening in this town, and whatever it is, it's happening on this beach. I want to watch it for a while. She pulls out her book. I can finish reading this at the same time. I admit it's a good view, I say, looking out of the hatch at the gleaming expanse of sand. You can even see the Leviathan from here. The what? Over on the horizon, where the waves are now. Do you see it? Violet leans out. I can see something dark and jagged. It looks massive. What is it? It's all that's left of the battleship Leviathan, I tell her. It was wrecked years ago. You can walk out to it when the tide is at its lowest, though it's pretty dangerous, and some say I trail off. What? Says Violet, but all I can do is point. I hear Violet gasp. Boathook Man. It's true, and he's not over by the pier or stalking across the horizon by the wreck. He's right below us, shuffling zombie-like between two of the sheds, his head swinging from side to side as if he's looking for something. Get in, I whisper, pulling Violet back inside the shadow. What's he doing here? She whispers back. Was he following us? I say a bad word. Not a really bad word, but bad enough. After everything that's happened, we should have been more careful. We creep forward again and crouch in the shadow of the hatchway to watch. Boathook Man stops and cocks his head as if listening. We go completely still. He cocks his head the other way. And then he looks down at the wet sand where two sets of footprints are clearly visible. Footprints that led straight to the door of the shed we are hiding in. Boathook Man looks up, and we dart back again. Oh, bladder racks, I say. He saw us. He's coming up. But sure enough, the ladder that is bolted to the inside of the shed, which rises up the entire 4 stories, starts shaking violently. Which means we can't go down, says Violet, so... She runs to the hatchway and grabs a rope that is attached to a small pulley outside. For a moment, I think Violet is going to rappel down, which would be nuts, as the rope is nowhere near long enough. But I was wrong. Instead, while I'm standing there like a lemon, clutching my cap, Violet swings out into mid-air. The ancient building creaks and cracks under the strain. Violet lets go of the rope at just the right moment and grabs the hanging net, the one spread between 2 of the sheds. The net sags under her weight, and the building complains again. But Violet gains her balance and is now safely outside. The rope swings back to me. Quick, Herbie, jump! Well, you've probably worked out by now that I'm not a quick Herbie jump kind of guy. I mean, it's not as if there's much need for jumping and exclamation marks in the daily life of a lost property attendant. But Violet has changed all of that. Also changing it is the dismal bearded face of Boathook Man as he rises up through the floor behind me, streaming with water. He slams his hook into a beam and pulls himself up into the room in one easy motion. So I jump out of the hatchway and grab the rope. Well, what else can I do? I swing out, but I've got the angle wrong. I miss the net and swing straight back toward the hatchway. Herbie, Violet shouts, making her way across the net toward me. Boathook Man grabs the rope with his good hand, just above my head. And now I'm dangling, 4 stories up, like a fish on a line. The boat hook comes up and draws level with my eyes. At this point, I can let go of the rope and probably break both my legs, or I can stay where I am and be filleted like a small lemon-flavored herring in a Lost and Founder's cap. And that's when something blue-green flashes in front of my face, something blue-green and angular, which strikes Boathook Man in the eye. It's Violet's book. Boathook Man staggers back, his mouth open in a wordless cry of shock, his good hand clutching at his eye, and no longer holding the rope. "Herbie!" Violet shouts again, but I don't need to be told this time. I kick hard and push myself away from the shed, swinging out in the right direction. I throw myself forward and just about manage to get a hand on the net. Violet grabs my coat and pulls me in beside her. The two rickety black sheds creak ominously as the net swings under our weight. We begin to climb down, but it's slower than you might imagine because the net is so loose. We're only halfway down. We're only halfway down when everything shudders, causing us to lose our grip and fall. We grab on again and look up to see that Boathook Man has jumped too. That was the shudder we felt, and is now in the net above us, hanging by his hook, staring down at us with a face like a thundercloud, seawater showering from his swinging beard. "Let's go, Herbie," Violet cries, and she does so herself. We're still quite high, and I hear her land heavily on the sand beneath me. I let go too and land beside her, the air escaping from my lungs with an oof. Violet starts to run, but cries out and falls down again. "My ankle, I've hurt it." "Hold on to my arm," I say, snatching up my cap and getting ready for us to run as fast as we can together. I risk a glance back, and I'm pleased to see that it's not easy to climb down a loose fishing net when one of your hands is a boat hook. Boathook Man looks hopelessly tangled. But we don't get to start that run. "Well, well, well," says a voice as the broad frame of a man appears between the black sheds ahead of us, barring our way to freedom. "This is no way to treat a book," the man adds, picking Violet's green book up and brushing the wet sand off it. It's Sebastian Eels. Chapter 16. The Malamander Egg. "I think the mermonkey meant for you to read this," says Sebastian Eels, handing the book back to Violet, "not use as a frisbee." "We need to go," I say, helping Violet up and preparing to lead her away, but stopping because the man moves back in front of us. Up above, we can hear Boathook Man continue in his struggle down the net. "Or could it be," Eels continues, "that you have read it already and don't like what you found?" Eels is looking intently at Violet, as if searching for some sign. Behind us, we hear a wet thud as Boathook Man finally reaches the sand. I turn and see him hulking toward us, his hook held high. I'm just about to yell at Violet to run, never mind her bad ankle, when Sebastian Eels holds up his hand to Boathook Man. Now, my friend, no need to get excited. I told you I just wanted to chat with these young people, not terrify them. And that hook of yours is very intimidating. They must be worried about what an angry man like you could do with such a fearsome weapon." Boathook Man comes to a halt, just a few paces away from us. "It is," he says in a rush of damp air. "It is the girl." But Sebastian Eels silences him with a look. "Chat?" says Violet, dropping my arm and standing as tall as she can. "Chat about what?" Sebastian Eels is still watching Violet closely. His eyes flick to me for a moment and then back to Violet. "Oh, I think we just got off to a bad start, that's all," he says, with a smile that is obviously meant to be charming. Back in the book dispensary, then he turns to Boathook Man and says in a commanding tone, "Stay here, rest a while, come to me again later." I risk a glance over my shoulder. Boathook Man hesitates a moment and then begins to back off, receding into the gloom between the sheds until there's nothing to be seen there but a strange patch of swirling mist. "I'll walk you back to town, Miss Parma," says Eels, putting his arm around Violet's shoulders. "I doubt you can move very fast with that hurt leg." "I'll be fine, thanks," comes Violet's cold reply as she ducks out from under the man's arm. "Oh, I'm sure you will," Eels says. "It must have been hard for you to grow up without your parents. It's impressive that you have decided to come here looking for them, all by yourself. That is, you are all by yourself, aren't you? In your searches, apart from the gallant Herbie, naturally." "What do you mean by that?" asks Violet. "Well, I'm just wondering if you are working with someone. To find your parents, I mean. The police, for example? Or perhaps some form of private detective agency?" "I have Herbie," says Violet, setting off at a limp. I groan inside as I follow. "It's his job to get lost things back home again. He's the only detective I need. Unless there's something you can tell me about my parents." "Me?" Eels says, catching up with her. "Oh, I don't think I can help you. I only wish I could. I'm just an old daydreamer, that's me. Like all writers, I suppose. I'm only here for the stories." "Like the story of the Malamander," says Violet. "It's true that the particular legend has long fascinated me," Eels says, adjusting his tie. "It's a complex tale with ancient roots." "In that case," says Violet, "you must know all about the Malamander Egg." At that, I swear, Sebastian Eels twitches, ever so slightly. He recovers and gives Violet a sideways look. "So you're curious about that," he says. "A magical egg that can grant your wishes? That can make your dreams come true? Like the sound of it, do you?" "Wouldn't anyone?" says Violet in a neutral voice, and I realize what she's doing. She's fishing for information by pretending to know more than she does. "And if you had such a thing in your possession, Violet Parma," Eels continued, "if you could wish for your heart's desire, I wonder what you would choose." Violet doesn't say anything, and frankly, I'm not surprised. "Your poor lost parents, of course." Sebastian Eels supplies an answer for her, with an exaggerated sigh of sympathy. Violet still doesn't speak. I look at her, but it's hard to see her face now inside her hair. "What a shame such a magic doesn't exist," Eels goes on, kicking a hard pebble across the beach. "That all we have are stories." "You don't believe in any of it, then?" says Violet. "You don't believe the Malamander is real?" "Goodness me, no. We folklorists have to keep a level head. Stories like this often perform a social function. In this case, generations of worried parents have used the Malamander as a boogeyman to scare their children away from the sea. The beach at low tide can be very dangerous." "And the roaring, wailing sound," I say, "that you can sometimes hear from the sea? People say that's the Malamander calling for its long-lost mate." "People will say anything for a bit of attention," says Eels with a superior smile. "But it's just the wind howling around the wreck of the old battleship. Nothing mysterious about that." "What did my dad think, I wonder?" Violet stares straight ahead as she asks this. "Oh, dear Peter," Eels replies with a shake of his head. "He had some fanciful notions. He could have been a great man if, well, it's too late now, isn't it? Such a tragedy he died so young." "My parents aren't dead," said Violet firmly, "only missing." Sebastian Eels says nothing. "What notions?" I ask, because I really don't like these awkward pauses. "Well, I don't mind admitting that Peter and I didn't always see eye to eye," says Eels. "But his conclusion about the Malamander is especially comical. He actually seemed to believe that the creature was real. It's probably just as well he didn't finish his book. If it had been published, it would have been a great embarrassment for him. Wait, my dad was writing about the Malamander too, says Violet. Eels turns to look at her sharply. If I had to guess, I'd say Violet has just revealed how little she really knows. Indeed, he says. And you've read it, says Violet. My dad's book? Sebastian Eels pauses, as if measuring up how to respond. I read some of the manuscript, yes. But it was never finished, and sadly, all Peter's papers have gone missing too. Such a shame. We reach the steps back up to the town. Well, goodbye, Violet Parma, says Eels, lifting his hat. I would rest that leg for a few days if I were you. He begins to turn away, but suddenly swings back. Oh, but if you should come across any of your dear father's writings, I would be prepared to offer a reasonable price for them. You'd buy my dad's unpublished book? Says Violet. I thought you said it was comical. I'd still like to preserve his work, Eels smiles, for old time's sake. Then he fixes Violet with a narrow eye. I'd pay handsomely for even a single page, should you find one. And with another tip of his hat, Sebastian Eels turns and strides away across the beach. Chapter 17, Jenny Hanover. Blast this stupid leg, Violet groans, flopping down on a bench on the promenade. The climb has obviously been hard on Violet's sprained ankle. I look back down to the beach, but there is no sign of Sebastian Eels now. Sea mist coming in again, I say. It's going to get even colder, Vi. Whatever else Eels said, he's right that you should rest that leg. Let's get back to my lost and foundry. I can share my leftover lunch with you. And then what? Says Violet, rubbing her ankle. We don't seem to be getting anywhere. At least we know that Boathook Man and Eelface are working together, and the things he told you about the Malamander. Herbie, I came here to find my parents, not a monster. But what do you want to do then? I say. Violet looks up at me. It's time I got some straight answers. She gets to her feet and starts limping into town. I want to see the only other person I've found who actually met my mom and dad. By the time we reach the Erie Book Dispensary, the sea mist has engulfed the whole town. The streets are already emptying as everyone hurries home. It's so cold now that everything the mist touches gains a sparkle of ice. Looks like she closed early, I say, rattling the door. Jenny Hanover doesn't keep regular hours anyway. We should go before we freeze to death. Violet bangs on the door. Hello? She shouts through the mail slot. Some people walking on the other side of the square glance over, curious. Inside the window, just visible in the cold winter light, the mermonkey grins down at us from behind its enormous black typewriter. Seriously, Vi, I say, lowering my voice. There's no one in. And then, Erwin the cat is there. One moment, there's nothing but fog. The next, the cat is curling around Violet's legs and purring ferociously. Violet stoops to pick him up, her hands vanishing into his thick white coat of fur. He must have crept up on us out of the mist, I say. Poor thing wants to get in. Where can Jenny be? I'm here, says a voice, and we turn, squinting into the gloom. Jenny Hanover steps out of the mist, wearing a long, scale-patterned coat and a furry green scarf. When I catch sight of her face, I think for a moment that she looks tense, worried even. And then she smiles, so perhaps not. It's hard to tell anything straight in the mist. I'm not actually open, as you can see, Jenny says as she fiddles with her enormous bunch of keys. But since you seem to be rescuing my cat, the least I can do is let you in and warm you up. Inside, the embers of the fire glow in the grate. I think to myself that it's odd of Jenny to go out and leave a fire burning unattended in a book dispensary. Was she called out urgently? Or am I trying too hard to play the detective? You closed early? I ask as Jenny throws logs on the fire. Sea mist days are never busy, she replies. And besides, I had to visit the doctor. Dr. Thelassie, says Violet, limping into one of the fireside armchairs. Yes, says Jenny, removing her coat and scarf and looking at Violet. "And maybe you should see him too. How did you hurt your leg, Violet?" I just twisted it." Jenny pulls over a low stool and lifts Violet's leg onto it. "Let me get you a hot drink and then I'll take a look. A tight bandage should help you move more easily." She walks to the door, but then turns to look back at Violet. "I was wondering when I'd see you again. Does she seem a bit funny to you?" I whisper to Violet after Jenny is gone. "A bit shifty?" "She said she went to Dr. Thelassie," Violet whispers back. "But she doesn't seem unwell to me." I shrug. You can't always tell if someone's ill just by looking at them. When Jenny comes back, she has a plate of biscuits and 3 mugs of hot chocolate. She puts the tray on a low table between us and asks Violet to take off her boot. It's not until she's wrapping Violet's ankle in a soft white bandage that she speaks again. "So, Violet Parma, did you read the book the mermonkey chose for you?" I glance over to the mermonkey, sitting hunched and hairy in the shadows, its back turned to us. In the flickering light of the fire, with nothing but dusk and freezing mist in the windows beyond, it almost seemed to be moving. Violet fishes the book out from her coat pocket and props it open near the fire. It got a bit wet today, but I've started reading it, yes. And I'd like you to tell me," says Vi, "how well you really knew my dad." Jenny doesn't answer as she finishes the bandage. Then she sits back with a sigh. "I wanted to say something yesterday, but when I saw which book you'd been given, I thought I might be interfering." "Interfering?" Violet blinks. "That's a funny thing to say. Interfering with what?" "It's the book your parents were dispensed, Violet," Jenny says. "The last night before they disappeared." Violet picks up the book again and stares at it, open-mouthed. "The truth is, I knew your dad well," Jenny continues. "That old mermonkey must have dispensed dozens of books to him over the years. In fact, it's probably because of Peter that it's still working at all." "Really?" says Violet. Jenny gives a rueful smile. "The mermonkey used to break down a lot, so I took to getting it new parts to mend the mechanism. Peter put a stop to that. He said I had to fix the original part, no matter how twisted the lever or how worn the gear. He once even stopped from changing its tatty old hat for a new one. He said the magic wouldn't work if I changed a single thing. So he patched that old hat up himself. And it's still there to this day. And so is the magic." Jenny gets to her feet and walks over to the shop counter, behind which are hundreds of clippings, postcards, and pictures. She pulls something off the wall and comes back to hand it to Violet. "Your father often stayed here for weeks at a time," says Jenny. "There are spare rooms upstairs, and I'm happy to put people up, especially if they've come a long way to consult the mermonkey. Peter was here a great deal at one time because of his work." I lean over and see that Violet is holding a photograph. It shows a scholarly-looking black man with large glasses and a close-cropped beard. He looks serious, but somehow playful at the same time, as if he were snapped just at the moment he was about to break into a smile. Violet is staring at the photo with bright eyes. It doesn't look as though she can speak right now. "You can keep the photo, of course," says Jenny. Then I spoil the moment by making a rude slurping noise with my cocoa. "When you say his work," I blurt out quickly, "do you mean his writing?" Jenny nods. "Peter Parma was a brilliant folklorist who loved our old legends, one legend in particular." "The Malamander," Violet says. She opens her book and slips the photo inside. "I don't think anyone in the world knew more about that story than Peter," Jenny says. "He was obsessed with it by the end. I've met another writer who calls himself that." Violet brushes the last of the sand from the cover of her book. "An expert on the Malamander, I mean. And that's Sebastian Eels." Jenny pokes the fire. "He knew my dad too, didn't he?" Jenny stares at the poker in her hand for a moment. Then she shoves it onto the wooden scuttle. "Oh, yes," she says. "They knew each other all right." Chapter 18. The Monster Hunt. Your dad believed the Malamander is real, says Jenny, warming her hands on her mug and staring into the fire. Sebastian Eels did not. That's really where the trouble began. Why did he believe it? Asks Violet. Did he see something? Yes, says Jenny. He would go out on the beach at night, at low tide, and walk in the moonlight. He swore blind that he saw something scuttling from shadow to shadow or creeping along the sands, just at the edge of sight. One misty night he came back here, banged on my door at some crazy hour, gabbling about seeing the Malamander. I liked him, so I didn't mind. Everyone in this town has a story to tell about the foreshore at winter. It's that kind of place. But Peter was sure he got onto something new. He was writing a book, a huge book. The definition on the subject, that's what he called it. He said he was going to put the Malamander on the map. He said he was going to solve the mystery of it once and for all. But he didn't reckon on having competition. Eels, I say, and Jenny nods. Sebastian Eels was also writing a book. He's been working on what was supposed to be the greatest work on the Malamander for years, since long before Peter showed up. Looking back, I suppose it was inevitable that they would clash. You see, while your dad came to believe passionately that the creature was real, Sebastian knew with equal opportunity that the Malamander was just a story, a myth, a cautionary tale told over centuries to frighten children. So what happened? Asks Violet. They went hunting for it, says Jenny. Simple as that. After months of arguing and confronting each other, your dad said they should settle the matter once and for all and go together out to look for it. If they found the monster, Sebastian would have agreed to abandon his book. But, I say, what if they didn't find it? Would Vi's dad have stopped writing his book? That didn't seem fair. Not finding something doesn't prove it isn't there. I know, said Jenny, but Peter was so sure of himself that he was willing to risk it. That was the deal they made. So one winter's night, out on the beach, at a low tide of Peter's choosing, they went monster hunting together. And did they find anything? Says Violet. No one knows for sure what happened. They set out at 10 p.m. with nothing but rain gear, flashlights, and cameras. The next day, early, a small crowd had gathered on the seawall to watch them return. The whole town knew about the expedition. I was there myself. When the men came off the beach, they looked terrible. They were covered in silt and sand, and their hair was wild. Neither one would speak, and to my knowledge, the two never exchanged a single word again. Your father came straight here, to his room, packed, and left town. But what did they see? Violet says, her eyes as wide as scallop shells. What happened? Jenny shrugs. Nobody knows. Except Sebastian. If you really want to know, you'll have to ask him. Most of the town thought they'd just had a fight and that was that. All I could tell you was that after your dad left, Sebastian Eels stopped working on his book, just abandoned it. It looks as though there won't be any great work on the Malamander after all. But wait, says Vi with a frown. When did this happen? This wasn't when my dad vanished, was it? Oh no, says Jenny. Exactly 1 year after all this happened, your dad came back. It was midwinter, and he just turned up at the door, all smiles, as if no time had passed at all. He had the manuscript for his book under his arm, a huge pile of papers, all finished and ready to be published, so he said. And he wasn't alone. He had a woman with him, and you, Violet, a tiny baby. Barely a few months old. A woman? Asks Violet. My mom? Yes, says Jenny. I hadn't met her before, but I always got the feeling your dad had someone. That was the only time I met her, though. What's her name? Violet's voice was so small now that you could hardly hear her. My mom. What's her name? Jenny shakes her head. I'm really sorry, Violet. I can't remember. It was a very brief meeting, and I was just amazed to see your dad again. He wanted to show your mother the mermonkey, I think. Took its hat and put it on, playing the fool. He was in high spirits. I got to hold you a moment while this was going on. But surely you can remember something about her. What was she like? All I remember, says Jenny, is that she was, how can I put it? Sciencey. Seemed to belong to a different world from your dad, I mean. He was all dreams and wild ideas, while she's more sciencey. I nearly drop my mug. I cry, exotic erratics! Violet and Jenny look up at me in amazement. Oh, bladder racks, I say. I'm just a ninny. Vi, I completely forgot to tell you. I found something out. I found out who your mother is. And I tell them about my phone call. The Natural History Museum. Jenny gives me a disbelieving look. Herbie, are you sure? I swear it's true. That's what the man said. But what about exotic erratics? Well, that's what he said when he answered the phone. Then, when he heard it was a stranger on the line, he changed it to something longer, something about a crypto and a zoo. What name did he give you? Violet cries, looking as if she's about to jump up and shake me. Herbie, my mother's name! Bronwyn, I declare, remembering. Bronwyn Strand. Dr. Bronwyn Strand. Yes, that sounds right, says Jenny. Now that you say it, it rings a bell. Bronwyn, says Vi, slumping back. My mum. There's quiet then, apart from the crackling of the fire. Erwin returns and jumps onto Violet's lap. She strokes him absently, but her eyes remain fixed on her mother's boots as they dry beside the fire. That was the last time I saw your father, Violet, says Jenny. The morning I heard that a baby, you, had been discovered alone in a room at the Grand Nautilus Hotel, and that your parents had vanished. There were tracks down by the sea. 2 pairs of shoes were found. One of the fishermen reported a missing boat. No one knows what happened to them, even to this day. All right, that is where we are stopping for today. Thank you guys for listening along to the 3rd episode of Malamander by Thomas Taylor. And while you guys are waiting for the next episode, keep reading with your reading buddy, keep working on those crafts and those coloring pages, and have fun. It's summer. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.